Chosen one. You are not watching this by accident. Heaven has aligned your steps and orchestrated this very moment with divine precision. This is holy timing, a sacred appointment written long before today. Anointed one, you are standing at the edge of a supernatural financial breakthrough, a divine wealth transfer that has already begun moving in your direction. The atmosphere around your life is shifting, and the courts of heaven are stirring. As Scripture says, it will surely come. It will not delay. Let this word awaken your spirit, ignite your faith, and prepare you for the victory heaven has already declared over you. Chosen one. When we attempt to interpret spiritual phenomena such as heaven's laughter or divine response, it is essential to understand that these expressions are symbolic frameworks used to describe shifts in a person's psychological, emotional, and spiritual trajectory. What you experience today, although outwardly ordinary, represents a significant pattern interruption, an event that carries more weight in the unseen mechanisms of inner transformation than you may consciously realize. Human beings often underestimate the impact of small decisions, yet research across psychology, behavioral science, and neurotheology consistently demonstrates that micro-actions can trigger cascading changes within cognitive, emotional, and spiritual systems. In prophetic language, this cascading effect is described as the moment heaven laughs. When ancient spiritual texts describe the divine as laughing, they are pointing to a moment in which the outcome of a process becomes inevitable. In mathematics and physics, this resembles the concept of a tipping point, the instant when a system, after accumulating pressure and data over time, shifts irreversibly into a new state. Your action today, subtle as it appeared, functioned as such a tipping point. It signaled that your internal alignment had shifted, that your patterns had changed, and that your trajectory was no longer compatible with previous cycles of fear, hesitation, or stagnation. In prophetic tradition, this is interpreted as heaven responding to your step with triumph. In scientific language, it is the moment when internal coherence overrides entropy. Chosen one. You may judge your progress harshly because human cognition is biased toward visible milestones. Psychological research shows that individuals tend to undervalue incremental progress, especially when dealing with emotional or spiritual challenges. However, the unseen processes, quiet consistency, whispered determination, subtle acts of integrity, performed outside the gaze of others, are the true engines of transformation. These internal behaviors activate neural pathways associated with resilience, meaning-making, and long-term behavioral change. What feels like a trembling step is at the level of brain and spirit a recalibration. In prophetic terms, this recalibration is perceived as a signal that your destiny is stabilizing, that the structure beneath your life is reorganizing toward growth rather than collapse. Your action today, even if performed within silence or uncertainty, represents a decision to move against inertia. Many individuals remain trapped in cycles of stagnation because they never disrupt their internal patterns. The moment you acted, whether by choosing hope over despair, forgiveness over resentment, or truth over comfort, you disrupted the psychological scripts that once governed your reactions. Neuroscience refers to this as neuroplastic adjustment. Prophetic tradition calls it obedience. Both perspectives agree even small acts can create ripples that extend far beyond the moment of their execution. This explains why the original text speaks of your action echoing before the throne of God. Metaphorically, the throne represents the governing principle of your life, the center of consciousness, where choices accumulate and form identity. What rose there today was not merely an isolated behavior, but evidence of an emerging pattern, one that contradicts previous narratives imposed by trauma, doubt, or fear. This is why the text interprets heaven's response as laughter, not mockery, but recognition. It is the acknowledgement that the momentum of your life has shifted, that the forces once aligned against you have lost predictive power, and that your internal development has outpaced the strategies designed to suppress it. Chosen one. Your survival itself functions as empirical data. Every day you continue to choose movement, even minimal movement. You invalidate the earlier hypothesis that you were too weak, too broken, or too late to fulfill your potential. Resilience researchers often emphasize that survival alone constitutes a form of success in high-pressure environments. Spiritually, this becomes testimony, the fact that you are still present, still reflective, still willing to engage with meaning, confirms that the systems designed to extinguish your hope were unsuccessful. Thus, heaven laughs because the predicted failure did not occur. And now, having acknowledged this, you stand at the threshold of acceleration. In psychological development, acceleration occurs when foundational beliefs shift toward empowerment, creating exponential effects in perception, motivation, and performance. In prophetic language, this is described as a season changing. The ground of your life, your assumptions, habits, emotional patterns is preparing to yield results that were previously impossible. All of it began with your yes today, a yes that science would call a micro-commitment, but that heaven interprets as a catalytic action in the unfolding of destiny. Chosen one. To understand why your recent actions carry such significance, we must examine the interplay between internal evolution and external outcomes. Humans often assume that breakthroughs are the result of dramatic, observable events. Yet across disciplines from complexity theory to developmental psychology, evidence consistently shows that the most transformative shifts arise from small, repeated deviations from old patterns. Your choice today, subtle though it appeared, represents a deviation powerful enough to destabilize the behavioral traps constructed by past conditioning, emotional fatigue, and external pressure. In prophetic terminology, this destabilization is described as breaking the cycle. Cycles, whether emotional, behavioral, or spiritual, operate much like feedback loops. Once established, they perpetuate themselves because the brain is wired to conserve energy and maintain familiarity. This is why fear often predicts hesitation, and why hesitation often predicts stagnation. But when you acted differently today, when you moved forward instead of freezing, spoke instead of remaining silent, or gave instead of withdrawing, you introduced a new input into the system. According to systems theory, even a single unexpected input can trigger a cascade of reorganization. This is the scientific foundation underlying the metaphor that heaven laughed. The laugh represents the collapse of the enemy's predictive model, the structure that once relied on your exhaustion, doubt, and hesitation to maintain stability. The original narrative speaks of heaven responding not to grand gestures, but to a whispered yes, suggesting that sincerity has greater spiritual weight than spectacle. Neuroscience reinforces this idea. Authenticity activates regions of the brain associated with emotional integration, reducing internal conflict and strengthening cognitive resilience. Small, sincere decisions often generate more long-term transformation than large, performative acts, which may lack internal alignment. Thus, your seemingly fragile step carries measurable psychological momentum. In spiritual interpretation, this momentum is framed as divine endorsement. Moreover, the metaphor of heaven magnifying hidden actions aligns with cognitive models of meaning-making. Humans assign disproportionate weight to visible achievements, often overlooking the immense internal labor required to reach them. But internal work, the quiet effort of choosing integrity, the emotional cost of forgiveness, the discipline of hope, is what rewires the mind toward growth. In the prophetic sense, heaven honors what is hidden because the unseen forms the blueprint of the seen. In scientific terms, hidden behaviors form the substrate upon which identity and destiny are built. Chosen one, your feelings of invisibility or insignificance arise not from truth, but from cognitive distortions, mental filters shaped by past experiences, social comparison, or emotional fatigue. These distortions minimize progress and amplify perceived inadequacy. Yet survival alone contradicts the narrative of insufficiency. Every breath, every attempt, every decision to continue represents successful resistance against psychological entropy. This is why the text insists that survival is testimony. In research on adversity, survival is often treated as evidence not of weakness, but of strength exceeding expectation. The concept of a shifting season described as moving from survival into acceleration mirrors the psychological phenomenon of phase transition, a non-linear shift in which accumulated internal changes produce sudden external transformation. It is not that your life changes overnight. Rather, the internal architecture reaches a threshold where transformation becomes visible. When prophetic language claims that heaven's laughter signals acceleration, it is expressing a human truth. Once internal coherence reaches sufficient strength, the external environment begins to reorganize in response. This reorganization often feels mysterious because we are not consciously aware of how past decisions interact with present opportunities. However, behavioral science shows that consistent internal alignment increases receptivity to new possibilities, enhances decision-making clarity, and improves resilience under stress. Prophetic tradition expresses this through the metaphor of doors unlocking or soil yielding harvest. Both scientific and spiritual frameworks converge on this point. Internal shifts create external openings. Chosen one. Your obedience, reframed scientifically as intentional micro-commitment, carries generational implications. Research in epigenetics increasingly supports the idea that choices made in one generation can influence biological, emotional, and behavioral outcomes in subsequent ones. When the text states that your actions echo through bloodlines, it is articulating a truth that modern science is only beginning to measure. Your decision to break a destructive pattern today may alter the trajectory of those who come after you. This is not poetic exaggeration. It is a reflection of how deeply human systems are interconnected across time. Thus, the laughter attributed to heaven symbolizes not mockery, but recognition. It is the metaphorical expression of a cosmic equation resolving in your favor. The forces that once predicted your collapse must now recalculate in response to your resilience. The outcome from the perspective of both prophecy and science has shifted. What once appeared fragile has revealed itself as foundational. What once seemed small has demonstrated substantial systemic influence. Today, you acted, and the universe or heaven in prophetic language responded. Chosen one. When we consider the assertion that heaven's laughter represents a shift in season, it is helpful to reinterpret this through the lens of developmental science and systems psychology. A season in prophetic vocabulary signifies a phase of life characterized by particular emotional patterns, cognitive frameworks, and external circumstances. Scientifically, this aligns with transitional periods in human development known as critical windows or growth thresholds. These are moments in which accumulated internal changes reach sufficient mass to alter how the individual perceives, interprets, and interacts with their environment. Your recent action, the quiet yes, the fragile move forward, functioned as a catalyst that nudged you past such a threshold. The shift you are experiencing may not feel dramatic, yet meaningful change rarely announces itself with spectacle. Behavioral research indicates that people are often unaware of their own turning points until retrospectively examined. You might look back one day and realize that the moment you thought was small was in fact the first signal of deep structural reorganization within your identity. Prophetic language expresses this by saying, "Heaven has entered a new season for you." But in scientific terms, it is more accurate to state that your internal system has crossed an adaptive boundary and is now capable of producing new patterns of thought, emotion, and behavior. This explains why the narrative emphasizes that long periods of silence, delay, or unanswered questions were not evidence of abandonment but conditions for internal strengthening. In physiology, the strengthening of muscle fibers occurs during periods of micro-tears, rest, and recovery. In psychology, resilience is developed not in the absence of stress, but through repeated exposure to manageable challenges that build emotional flexibility. In spiritual metaphor, these periods are described as hiddenness seasons, in which external progress is not visible, but internal capacity is expanding. The laughter of heaven then represents the moment in which the unseen internal development becomes sufficient to alter the trajectory of your future. Chosen one. When the text describes heaven's laughter as activation, it mirrors concepts found in neural activation patterns. Activation refers to the process by which a system becomes alert, responsive, and ready to operate at higher levels of efficiency. In your life, activation may manifest as renewed clarity, unexpected motivation, a sudden ability to release burdens that once felt immovable, or a fresh sense of direction. These shifts are not random. They reflect changes in cognitive coherence and emotional regulation. In spiritual vocabulary, this is interpreted as divine timing, the moment when everything begins to align, because you are internally ready to receive what you once could not sustain. The metaphor of seeds awakening after a long period in the soil is also scientifically grounded. Seeds require specific environmental triggers to germinate conditions such as temperature, moisture, and pressure. Your tears, struggles, and uncelebrated sacrifices created similar psychological and spiritual conditions. What felt like burial was often preparation. What seemed stagnant was incubation. Research in post-traumatic growth demonstrates that individuals who endure significant adversity often experience accelerated development in meaning-making, empathy, and internal strength once they reach the recovery phase. This aligns with the prophetic declaration that what was sown in the dark is now rising in the light. Moreover, the mention of generational impact can be reframed through epigenetics, which studies how experiences influence gene expression across generations. Stress, trauma, resilience, and healing can all leave biological markers that shape the lives of descendants. When the text asserts that your obedience carries generational weight, it is not merely symbolic. Your decision to act differently today may interrupt patterns of fear, silence, or self-limitation that have persisted for decades. In scientific terms, your choice becomes a form of generational rewiring. In prophetic terms, it becomes a legacy. Another important concept is confidence, not arrogance, but grounded assurance. Confidence arises when internal systems recognize stability within themselves. It is the result of coherence between belief, behavior, and purpose. The narrative argues that once you understand heaven has laughed over your life, you walk differently. Scientifically, this corresponds to shifts in posture, tone, decision-making, and interpersonal boundaries that accompany increased self-efficacy. When individuals internalize a sense of inevitability about their progress, external resistance loses influence. The system becomes less reactive, more regulated, and more oriented toward growth. The idea that heaven's laughter is a weapon may seem abstract, but metaphorically it speaks to the psychological power of reframing adversity. When a person interprets challenges not as signs of failure, but as opportunities or temporary obstacles, cognitive resilience strengthens. Negative stimuli lose their predictive power. Fear diminishes. Behavioral momentum increases. This shift is so significant that researchers in cognitive behavioral therapy emphasize reframing as one of the most effective tools for breaking cycles of anxiety and self-sabotage. Prophetic tradition, using different vocabulary, describes this same phenomenon as victory. Chosen one. Everything that once destabilized you is now losing influence because your internal architecture has changed. You have reached a point where your responses no longer reinforce old patterns. In scientific language, your system has reorganized. In prophetic language, heaven has laughed. Both point to the same truth: transformation has begun, and you are moving toward a future that aligns with your deepest potential. Chosen one, to grasp the deeper implications of what is unfolding within you, it is necessary to examine how seemingly small internal shifts accumulate into measurable external change. The prophetic statement that heaven's laughter signifies activation and preparation for increase corresponds closely with the scientific concept of emergent properties. In complex systems, theory emergence refers to the way simple, often imperceptible actions accumulate until they produce an outcome significantly greater than the sum of the individual components. What felt like isolated acts of endurance, forgiveness, or resilience were not isolated at all. They were inputs into a system that has now reached a point of emergent transformation. Your long season of waiting, which may have felt like stagnation, mirrors what scientists observe during latency periods in developmental biology. Many organisms undergo prolonged phases in which visible growth appears minimal, yet internal restructuring is happening at the cellular level. These periods are prerequisites for dramatic growth. In prophetic interpretation, this latency is understood as divine timing or hidden preparation. In scientific language, it is a phase of foundational recalibration. When the narrative states that heaven is laughing because the construction phase is ending and manifestation is near, it is essentially describing the moment when internal restructuring has progressed sufficiently to support external expansion. It is important to highlight the psychological and emotional processes that accompany such transitions. When individuals endure prolonged stress, disappointment, or silence, they often believe these experiences signal abandonment or failure. However, research in adaptive resilience suggests that these periods produce critical shifts in emotional thresholds, cognitive flexibility, and self-awareness. What feels like depletion is often the reorganization of internal boundaries. The prophetic framing that heaven's laughter signals your readiness aligns with the scientific observation that individuals often emerge stronger and more capable after enduring controlled adversity. Chosen one, when you hear phrases such as doors unlocking ceilings, breaking, or manifestation approaching these metaphors, point to a shift in your level of psychological openness. Behavioral science demonstrates that when individuals develop greater internal coherence, they become more receptive to opportunities they previously overlooked or dismissed. This receptivity is not random. It is the result of neural restructuring that enhances perception, motivation, and clarity. In prophetic language, this receptivity is interpreted as divine alignment, the moment when internal readiness meets external timing. An especially compelling intersection between spirituality and science appears in the idea that the forgiveness you offered and the sacrifices you made in silence are echoing in eternity. This assertion mirrors findings in trauma research and interpersonal neurobiology. Acts of forgiveness alter neural pathways, reduce stress hormones, and disrupt generational cycles of emotional inheritance. They create measurable physiological shifts. Similarly, consistent acts of integrity strengthen the prefrontal cortex and stabilize emotional regulation. These changes ripple outward, influencing relational patterns, family dynamics, and even community behavior. The prophetic claim that your hidden obedience carries generational weight is scientifically plausible. The narrative compares your journey to that of Joseph, a figure overlooked, confined, and seemingly forgotten, yet internally preparing for elevation. From a psychological standpoint, individuals who undergo prolonged isolation or under-recognized labor often develop heightened self-reliance, emotional intelligence, and adaptability. These skills become invaluable when sudden opportunities arise. Prophetic tradition compresses these insights into a single metaphor of divine timing. Science expands them, showing how internal competence precedes external opportunity. Thus, when the text declares that your hidden faithfulness is about to meet public favor, it reflects a well-documented principle: readiness precedes recognition. Another element worth analyzing is the shift from self-doubt to confidence. When the narrative urges you to walk with assurance, not arrogance, it draws attention to the distinction between self-efficacy and self-inflation. Self-efficacy arises from evidence from the lived experience of surviving challenges, completing difficult tasks, and making aligned decisions. It produces stability, clarity, and courage. Arrogance, by contrast, is compensatory. It emerges from insecurity. Your story, as interpreted through both scientific and prophetic lenses, points toward genuine self-efficacy, the confidence that arises when internal architecture aligns with purpose. Chosen one. The idea that heaven's laughter dismantles the strategies of darkness can be reframed as the psychological power of cognitive reorientation. When a person internalizes the belief that their story is not defined by failure, but by resilience, they undermine the predictive power of fear-based thinking. Fear thrives when individuals assume the worst outcome is inevitable. But when a person reinterprets challenges as evidence of preparation or transformation, fear loses its leverage. This is the psychological equivalent of breaking the enemy's script. Prophetic language captures the same truth. In metaphorical form, heaven laughs because the calculation of defeat has been disproven. Finally, the concept of a turning point, the moment when heaven's laughter becomes momentum, aligns with phase shift phenomena observed across natural systems. Whether in chemistry, ecology, or psychology, systems often reach a threshold where gradual internal change produces sudden external reorganization. The prophetic statement that your life is entering acceleration is consistent with this scientific framework. You are stepping into a period where aligned internal conditions generate rapid external transformation. Momentum, once established, becomes self-sustaining. Chosen one. When the narrative declares that heaven's laughter is not merely joy but prophecy, it signals an important psychological and spiritual truth. Your present emotional and behavioral patterns are strong predictors of future outcomes. In cognitive science, this is understood through trajectory theory, the idea that small shifts in mindset, belief, or behavior can significantly alter one's developmental arc over time. The moment you broke a familiar pattern today, choosing courage over fear or action over paralysis, you redirected that trajectory. Prophetic language interprets this redirection as a divine announcement of acceleration. Scientific reasoning identifies it as the point at which a system diverges from its previous path and begins evolving toward a new state. This is why the text emphasizes that the laughter of heaven reveals what truly matters. In behavioral psychology, the true indicators of future success are rarely spectacular achievements, but rather small, consistent, internal commitments. Integrity, perseverance, and self-regulation predict long-term outcomes far more reliably than one-time displays of effort. When prophetic language states that heaven celebrates the hidden, it echoes research showing that disciplined internal behaviors, especially those performed without external validation, create durable neural pathways that support resilience and growth. Chosen. 1. Consider the metaphor of a child taking their first steps. Science describes this moment as a developmental milestone marking the transition from dependency to mobility. The emphasis is not on perfection but on movement. Each wobble is an experiment, each fall a recalibration. Prophetic language invokes this image to illustrate a core psychological truth. Progress is validated by effort, not flawlessness. When heaven laughs at your step, it is expressing the same principle that courage, even trembling courage, signals the presence of potential. Another claim worth analyzing is that heaven's laughter drowns out the whispers of doubt. This aligns with cognitive reappraisal theory, which examines how reinterpreting a situation alters emotional response. When individuals replace interpretations rooted in fear with interpretations grounded in purpose or meaning, neurological pathways associated with anxiety weaken, while those associated with confidence strengthen. This shift creates measurable changes in stress regulation and decision-making. The prophetic declaration that God's laughter silences fear mirrors this psychological mechanism. Reframing experiences through a lens of assurance reduces the influence of internal doubt. The narrative also highlights the importance of moving from approval, seeking to alignment with one's intrinsic identity. In social psychology, extrinsic validation is shown to be unstable and unsustainable. Individuals who depend heavily on external approval develop vulnerabilities to rejection, comparison, and uncertainty. By contrast, those grounded in internal validation, a sense of self that is coherent and anchored, demonstrate higher levels of autonomy, resilience, and purpose-driven behavior. When prophetic language encourages you to walk, not for approval, but from approval, it is describing the psychological liberation that emerges when identity becomes anchored in internal truth rather than external perception. Chosen one. The instruction to recognize heaven's laughter as confirmation parallels the role of feedback loops in complex systems. Feedback that affirms correct alignment encourages further aligned behavior. When individuals perceive signs that they are on the right path, whether spiritually, emotionally, or practically, they gain energy, clarity, and momentum. This is why prophetic interpretation treats divine laughter as a seal of victory. It functions as positive reinforcement within the internal system, strengthening your confidence in the direction you're moving. The narrative's assertion that heaven responds to sincerity over spectacle reflects a vital concept in neuroscience. Authenticity reduces cognitive load. When behavior aligns with internal values, the brain operates more efficiently, lowering stress and increasing coherence. This coherence enhances intuition, decision-making, and creativity. In prophetic terms, this alignment grants access to divine guidance or favor. In scientific language, it optimizes neural integration. Another profound claim in the narrative is that your minimal step today rattled eternity. Interpreted scientifically, this suggests that small actions hold disproportionate influence over complex systems. The butterfly effect, rooted in chaos theory, proposes that minute inputs can trigger dramatically different outcomes over time. Your decision, however seemingly insignificant, disrupted predictive models of your past behavior. It introduced new variables into systems governed by fear, habit, or stagnation. Prophetic language interprets this as a spiritual event. Science interprets it as sensitivity to initial conditions. Both acknowledge the magnitude of small beginnings. Chosen one. The text insists that victory is destiny, not theory. Destiny in prophetic discourse refers to the convergence of internal readiness and external opportunity. The scientific equivalent is potential energy transforming into kinetic energy. A system poised for movement will begin moving once a threshold is crossed. You have crossed such a threshold. What once existed as dormant potential, resilience, clarity, strength is now becoming active force. Thus, the laughter attributed to heaven symbolizes the inevitability of the transformation underway. It reflects recognition that the architecture of your life has shifted from fragility to stability, from hesitation to momentum. This moment is not symbolic, but structural. You have entered a new phase, and both science and prophecy agree once a system shifts, it does not return to its previous state. Chosen one. When the narrative declares that heaven has been laughing over you even in seasons of silence, it invites an analysis of how unseen processes operate during periods of perceived stagnation. In scientific and psychological contexts, silence is rarely synonymous with inactivity. Instead, it often marks a phase of critical internal reorganization. During these intervals, systems recalibrate, gather resources, and prepare for measurable change. This parallels the prophetic assertion that delay is not denial, but preparation. What appears dormant on the surface may in fact be undergoing essential restructuring beneath it. The human nervous system provides a clear example. When an individual undergoes prolonged emotional or cognitive strain, the brain does not simply shut down. Rather, it reallocates energy, strengthens coping mechanisms, and forms new neural pathways. These transformations are not immediately visible, but they profoundly alter future response patterns. In prophetic language, this is described as God strengthening you in hiddenness. Science views it as neuroadaptive growth, a form of resilience that arises from repeated exposure to difficulty followed by recovery. Chosen. One, consider the idea that heaven's laughter breaks chains, a statement rich in metaphor but grounded in psychological truth. Chains, in a scientific sense, represent entrenched behavior patterns shaped by trauma, habit, or fear. These patterns persist because the brain favors predictability over unfamiliarity, even when the familiar is harmful. However, when an individual introduces a new behavior, however small, the pattern begins to destabilize. This destabilization is not instantaneous, but develops through repeated choices that contradict the old cycle. The prophetic assertion that you broke the pattern aligns with what psychologists call a pattern interrupt, an intentional disruption that initiates cognitive reorganization. This is why the narrative emphasizes that heaven's laughter corresponds to your decision to act differently. Even one altered response can create a fault line in the old structure. Behavioral systems once disrupted cannot maintain the same internal logic. A single deviation forces recalculation. This explains the statement that the enemy's strategy crumbled. In scientific terms, the predictive model lost reliability. Systems built to anticipate your hesitation must now adapt to a new behavioral sequence, one rooted in resilience rather than fear. Another key theme worth analyzing is transformation through breaking silence. When prophetic language encourages you to stand, speak, or move, when fear pressures you to remain still, it aligns with research on self-advocacy and assertive behavior. Speaking one's truth increases psychological agency, the belief that one can influence outcomes. Agency has measurable effects: improved mental health, stronger boundary making, and increased problem-solving capacity. Therefore, when heaven rejoices because you spoke when silence felt safer, it is affirming a scientifically supported truth. Agency disrupts helplessness. Chosen one. The reference to seeds breaking through soil offers a biologically accurate metaphor. Seeds spend most of their developmental cycle underground, unseen, enduring pressure and darkness. Growth occurs gradually until a critical threshold allows for emergence. This threshold is determined not by visibility, but by internal readiness. Likewise, your unseen work, the prayers, choices, sacrifices, and resilience cultivated in private, has created the internal pressure necessary for emergence. When prophetic tradition describes heaven laughing because your harvest is near, it is recognizing this biological principle of latent growth followed by accelerated expansion. The text also emphasizes the importance of generational impact. This idea resonates strongly with epigenetic research, which shows that experiences, especially trauma and healing, alter patterns of gene expression that can be inherited. Acts of resilience. Forgiveness and renewal create biochemical signatures that influence future generations. Thus, your decision to break cycles today is not metaphorical, but biological. You may be altering the emotional and physiological inheritance of those who come after you. In prophetic vocabulary, this becomes legacy. In scientific language, intergenerational adaptation. Another powerful theme is the shift from survival to overflow. Survival mode activates the brain's threat response systems, prioritizing safety over creativity, vision, or expansion. But once internal conditions stabilize through resilience healing or new belief structures, the brain transitions from survival pathways to growth pathways. Cognitive bandwidth increases, possibilities expand. You begin to imagine a future rather than simply endure the present. This is why the text insists that heaven's laughter marks the beginning of overflow. Scientifically, it marks the transition from defensive functioning to generative functioning. Chosen one. The narrative also describes heaven's laughter as warfare, a term that can be translated scientifically into the concept of cognitive reframing. When you reinterpret adversity as preparation rather than punishment, the psychological impact of that adversity changes. Anxiety diminishes. Stress responses soften. The emotional brain becomes less reactive, allowing the logical brain to take the lead. This shift undermines the influence of fear-based narratives. In prophetic phrasing, it defeats the enemy. From a scientific standpoint, it is cognitive liberation. Finally, the text's claim that your story is unfolding in victory corresponds with the idea of narrative identity, the personal story you construct about your life. Research shows that individuals who frame their experiences as part of an upward trajectory develop stronger resilience and achieve greater well-being. A victorious narrative is not delusion. It is a cognitive strategy that shapes neural pathways and influences future behavior. When heaven laughs over your life, it is affirming a narrative arc that science recognizes as psychologically transformative. I chosen one. When the message speaks of heaven's laughter as a living roar, it uses symbolic language to describe a profound internal recalibration. In scientific terms, this can be compared to a dominant signal overriding weaker neural patterns. Your internal system is shifting from fragmentation toward coherence, a phenomenon often observed when individuals experience significant psychological reframing. What prophetic language interprets as a divine response can also be understood as the moment your internal beliefs begin to synchronize into clarity, direction, and renewed agency. The metaphor of a roar points to the emergence of a guiding signal strong enough to silence competing forms of doubt. The narrative's emphasis on laughter as momentum carries deep scientific implications. Momentum in physical terms increases with both mass and velocity. Psychologically, once a belief system gains enough emotional weight and mental velocity, it becomes resistant to interruption. This explains why once you begin to believe you are capable, worthy, or divinely aligned, your behavior changes in a stable direction. You hesitate less. You recover more quickly. You regulate your emotions with greater ease. Prophetic tradition interprets this as heaven propelling you forward, but analytically, it is the inertia of renewed cognitive patterns taking hold. Chosen one. When the narrative states that small acts trigger large outcomes, this aligns closely with chaos theory and the concept of sensitive dependence on initial conditions. Small internal shifts produce ripple effects across your psychological ecosystem. A decision to forgive a moment of discipline, a refusal to collapse under pressure, all function as catalytic variables. These variables reorganize internal states, modify future decisions, and create new pathways for opportunity. What the prophetic lens calls a ripple in eternity is scientifically the amplification of small behavioral inputs within a complex adaptive system. When the message declares that heaven celebrates your resilience, it mirrors findings in resilience psychology. Survival is not a trivial process. It involves complex interactions among cognitive endurance, emotional regulation, and meaning-making. The simple act of continuing, even when weak, represents the activation of adaptive systems within the brain. These include persistence circuits, hope constructs, and belief frameworks that protect against collapse. Thus, the claim that every breath declares victory captures a measurable truth. The body and mind prioritize survival and can rewire themselves toward long-term strength. The text's imagery of shaking foundations or breaking cycles can be interpreted through the lens of cognitive restructuring. When a long-held belief is challenged, particularly one formed during trauma, the brain undergoes a destabilization period. Old neural pathways weaken while new interpretations form. This restructuring is often uncomfortable, but it is essential for long-term growth. Prophetic interpretation calls this divine correction, or the breaking of chains. Analytically, it is neural plasticity reconfiguring the architecture of identity. Chosen one. The message asserts that your yes carries weight. Scientifically, this correlates with the concept of agency, the belief that one's actions influence outcomes. Agency is a predictive factor in resilience, goal attainment, and emotional stability. When you act from agency rather than fear, you strengthen neural pathways associated with empowerment and reduce activation of threat-based responses. Thus, a single act of faith in scientific terms reinforces the neural circuits of possibility. When the narrative states that your scars become guidance for others, it parallels research on post-traumatic growth. Individuals who endure adversity often develop increased empathy, moral clarity, and leadership capacity. Their lived experience becomes a cognitive blueprint for others navigating similar terrain. This is why your endurance carried through private battles becomes public wisdom. Prophetic language calls this a testimony. Scientific language calls it experiential knowledge distribution. The idea of divine transfer can be reframed through opportunity recognition theory. When internal beliefs shift from scarcity to expectancy, the brain becomes more attuned to resources and possibilities previously overlooked. A person who believes a new season is emerging will behave differently. They initiate conversations, pursue opportunities, and interpret obstacles as transient rather than absolute. What prophetic tradition names as supernatural transfer is in part the cognitive realignment that opens perceptual filters toward abundance. Chosen one. The narrative's final emphasis on rest is equally grounded in science. Rest, as described here, is not inactivity, but the reduction of hypervigilance. When an individual trusts their process, whether framed as divine timing or internal alignment, their cognitive load decreases. Reduced fear improves creativity, decision-making, and emotional regulation. In prophetic language, this is described as trusting the laughter of heaven. Scientifically, it is the movement from stress-dominant states toward a stable, regulated nervous system. When combined, these principles reveal a coherent truth. Your internal system is reorganizing in response to new belief structures. What the prophetic message calls divine laughter is the psychological experience of coherence, renewal, and alignment taking form. Chosen one. As this message comes to its sacred close, let the resonance of heaven's laughter remain upon your spirit. You have stepped into a moment that is not random, not accidental, but divinely timed. This is your Kairos hour. The King has smiled over you, and that smile has already shifted the atmosphere around your life. What you offered in quiet obedience has been recorded as victory, and what felt small on earth has thundered in the courts of heaven. Anointed one, walk forward, knowing the supernatural transfer has already begun. Doors are aligning because your name was spoken in joy. Blessings are converging because your yes carried weight. Breakthroughs are accelerating because heaven has already declared it is done. The soil that once held you in place is now breaking open with new life. What you sowed in tears is rising in abundance. So rise with holy confidence, stand in gratitude, move with reverence. The God who laughed in triumph today is the same God guiding every step you take tomorrow. His delight is your strength. His covering is your protection. His promise is your inheritance. Chosen one, stay faithful, stay aligned. Keep saying yes, even when the step feels small. Every act of obedience is echoing through eternity. If this word has stirred your spirit, let it be known. Share what resonated. Declare in the comments, "I receive this victory," only if your heart feels led. Go now in confidence. The King has laughed and your victory is already sealed.